And the final point I want to ask the parents to think about, I want you to think about a simple, again, human phenomenon. No doubt it's a part of our nature. We want our children to be like us as much as possible. We want them to keep our ways and our tradition. But I ask you an honest question. How similar are you to your mother or your father? Your mother or your father, are you exactly like them? Or are you a little bit different, or are you very different? Of course, we're all different. We are not clones of one another. And so if you, being a product of the same culture and the same civilization of your mother and father, turned out so different from them, what do you think of somebody who's been born and raised in a culture that is radically different than the one you grew up in? It's not going to happen. And when you try to demand it, you're only asking for trouble. Be realistic, be pragmatic. And this is a huge issue, this culture basically clash. You as an immigrant have never been treated by your parents the way that us as a second generation expect our parents to treat us. What I'm trying to say is basically the way that our peers in the western part of the world, Americans, are treated by their parents, our parents never treated us like that. That's never happened. We see the other kids and what their parents do with them. We know our parents don't do that to us. And that does affect us at some subconscious level. Understand, you're not living in the world that you grew up in. It's a very different world. Over here, parents spend time with their kids, take them to the ball game, do this, do that. That was not a culture that our grandparents did with our parents. It was a very different world. When we see other kids, their parents doing that with them, spending time with them, taking stuff, ridiculous things for us sometimes, but it's that concept of I care about you. I want to spend time with you. I want you to have a good time as well. When we see that, wallahi, the fact of the matter, you feel, how come my parents don't do that with me? Then you realize it's our culture. But that's not necessarily something that has to be positive. It can be changed. So you have decided, you who have immigrated here, you've decided to change your land and civilization. Realize that will come at a cost. And part of that cost, your etiquettes, your dealings with your second generation are going to change. We, as people who have been born and raised here, cannot act the way you acted when you were our age. We cannot. Don't expect us to, and don't blame us when we act different than what you did. It's not our fault. We have grown up in a place and a time and a culture that is radically different than the 60s and 50s and 40s back home. And this was a decision, with all respect, you made it. You made it, and now we are now being born and raised here based on that decision. Therefore, cut us some slack. Cut us some slack. Understand, there are elements you're going to preserve, and those elements need to be your religion and tawheed and prayer. And there's a lot of elements that will go out the window. I'm sorry to break this bubble for you, but languages, Persian, Urdu, even Arabic, they are not going to last too long. Look around you. How many of us here who are from a Pakistani Indian background are able to converse to each other in Urdu? How many of us? How many of us? Hardly any. If this is the case for us when our parents still speak Urdu, how long do you think it's going to last? I'm pretty much sure my children and their grandchildren, they're not going to, I kind of sort of went past speaking Urdu. My kids barely speak anything. And I don't expect them to marry somebody who's going to speak fluent Urdu and then pass it down. Be a bit realistic in this regard. Don't be, this is a decision, again, with all respect, you made it. And now you need to deal with that. This is a decision, you made it. Don't get angry if certain cultural elements are lost. And that's a deep topic in and of itself. Make sure the more important elements are preserved, and those elements are religious in nature. So these are the three advice that I had for the youth, the three advice I had for the parents.